At the age of 81, Tom Selleck rarely appears in public, and only in that very instant did his name make headlines again everywhere. His snow-white hair along with the white beard made quite a few people startled. The image of the man right in front of their eyes was completely unfamiliar compared to the memories of so many generations. For decades, he had been the symbol of calm masculinity on the screen. The television hero who wore colorful Hawaiian shirts, drove the bright red Ferrari, and always stood on the side of what was right. An almost perfect role model, without a single flaw. Yet behind that glamorous shell were the silent wounds that few people ever mentioned. The judgmental looks when he returned from military service, the relentless criticisms in the water incident during the drought period, and even the doubts about his sexuality simply because of a brief same-sex kiss that flashed across the screen in a movie. So amid all those tragedies, how exactly did Tom Selleck overcome them? And what helped him still stand firm when the halo of fame had been cracking little by little each day? Tom Selleck was born on January 29, 1945, in the city of Detroit. When he was 3 years old, his whole family moved to Sherman Oaks, California, a peaceful suburban area where everyone believed that the warm sunshine would open up a brand new beginning for all of them. The boy grew up in a house with 4 siblings. There was always the sound of laughter ringing through the place, but discipline was always present, especially from his mother Martha. She was not the type of mother who liked to hug or say sweet words. She was strict to the point of being harsh, yet she had never shown favoritism or been unfair. After nearly his entire life, Tom still deeply engraved the look in his mother's eyes in his mind. "My mother didn't need to yell or raise her voice," he once shared. "Just one single look from her, and I immediately understood what was not allowed to be done." She did not teach her children to stand out above everyone else. She taught them to follow principles, even when no one was watching. And perhaps it was precisely from that peaceful home, amid the brilliant California sunshine together with the simple rules of a mother of few words, that the little boy from back then learned endurance, learned silence, and grew up to become a man who rarely revealed his own private pain. The small childhood memories still remained completely intact in Tom. In later interviews, he once smiled as he recounted that his mother made absolutely delicious cherry pie, and the kids in the house had a strange habit. They would break the pie into small pieces, dip them in milk, and then eat them with a spoon. "We believed that way tasted much better," he said. "Looking back now, it seems really silly. But at that time, that was the complete joy of the entire afternoon." Tom grew up much faster than his friends of the same age. In his teenage years, he was already nearly 1.93 meters tall. Many people considered height an advantage that brought confidence, but for Tom it was completely the opposite. It made him feel out of place in the crowd. When he was taller than everyone else, he could not blend in, but instead was separated from everyone around him. Therefore, Tom gradually became quiet, less talkative, and in crowded gatherings, he would often step back to the rear. One memory that Tom Selleck has never forgotten, even after dozens of years. When he was little, his 2 older brothers caught a mouse and then chased him running around and around the house. In panic, Tom only knew to run. He dashed into the bathroom, locked the door tightly, curled up in a corner, and sat completely still for nearly an hour, not daring to open the door and not daring to move even an inch. When he recounted it many years later, Tom could not even laugh. He just shook his head slightly, as if the fear from that day was still completely intact. "I am tall," he said slowly, "but I am not always strong." That was not a complaint. It was simply the truth that the young boy realized early on. Sometimes outward appearance does not reflect at all what is really happening deep inside a child. Thanks to a sports scholarship for basketball and baseball, Tom stepped into the University of Southern California. On the court, His height and build always drew everyone's attention. For many people, the path ahead seemed already set. Pursue sports, a stable and safe life. But then, in an ordinary drama class, the teacher looked at Tom for a long time and quietly told him, "You should try acting." It was just one simple sentence, with no promises about the future at all. Yet that sentence haunted him forever, echoing even long after the class had ended. In the end, Tom decided to drop his business major to study at the Beverly Hills Playhouse. It was not because he was certain he would succeed, but because he did not want to live his whole life with that lingering regret, with the question that kept repeating itself. If he had dared to try back then, which direction would his life have taken? In 1967, when Tom had not yet graduated, the shadow of the Vietnam War hung over the whole of America. Protests broke out across universities. Society was deeply divided, and simply by putting on a military uniform, you could become a symbol for a war that you yourself had not chosen. Tom received orders to enlist and served 6 years in the California National Guard. He did not go to the battlefield and did not fire a single shot. But what he brought back with him was by no means light. Joining the military, Tom once shared, was the first time I truly understood what America really is. When he returned, he was not welcomed warmly. In the anti-war atmosphere of that time, many veterans were looked at with contemptuous eyes and even subjected to harsh curses. Although he was not directly attacked, he still admitted to the haunting feeling when he realized that simply by wearing that uniform, you could be judged. Looking back after many years, Tom did not consider enlisting a mistake, but he also did not view it as something to be proud of. It was simply a mandatory choice made by a young man in an era when sometimes people did not have the right to choose between right and wrong, but only knew to take responsibility for whatever they had to do. Perhaps it was precisely from that period that Tom learned how to stay silent in the face of judgment, how not to argue with the crowd, a quiet habit that quietly stayed with him throughout his entire life. After being discharged, Tom Selleck stepped into the entertainment world with the caution of someone who had never believed the stage lights would ever shine on him. He took small supporting roles and appeared in commercials for Pepsi, Revlon, and Right Guard, fleeting moments in which his face was quickly forgotten. He appeared in Daughters of Satan, Coma, and a few episodes of The Rockford Files. The movie titles sounded familiar, but the roles themselves were faint. To audiences, Tom was just a tall man who passed across the screen and then disappeared. And producers saw him as a bright, likable face, not yet enough for them to risk giving him major roles. There were evenings when Tom returned to his cramped rented room, hung his jacket on the hook, and then sat quietly on the chair. The room was so quiet that he could clearly hear the clock ticking on the wall. Whether the phone would ring the next day or not, he had no way of knowing in advance. Life at that time passed in endless periods of waiting, challenges that no one had ever taught him how to face. In that difficult period, the person who believed in him the most was not any director or producer, but his own mother. She still quietly went to watch every single film in which her son appeared, even when the role was not important at all. Once she watched an entire movie that had a nude scene, but Tom did not appear in it at all. When the lights came on, she turned to him with a smile and said, "You acted really well." Tom once recounted it in a soft voice, as if afraid of breaking something fragile. That was not praise for his acting talent. It was a reminder that even if the world could not see him, there was always one person who was watching over him. Nearly 10 years passed in that same repetition. On both television screens and the big cinema screen, Tom Selleck appeared and then quietly disappeared countless times. In 1971, he appeared in The 7 Minutes. By 1979, he appeared in The Sackets, a Western film beloved by audiences, where he co-starred with Sam Elliott. Even so, he was still only a faint shadow beside the other stars. His face made people feel somewhat familiar, but no one could remember his real name. 6 consecutive audition failures. 6 times he left the casting room with exactly the same emptiness inside. To the point that Tom began to question whether he had been heading in the wrong direction right from the very first steps. Then, in 1980, when he had almost accepted that this path might simply end right there, a role unexpectedly appeared and changed everything. That role was Thomas Magnum, a private detective who lived in Hawaii. He drove the bright red Ferrari, wore sunny floral shirts, and had the distinctive mustache that could not possibly be mistaken for anyone else's. He always carried a gun at his hip, but behind it was the past of a soldier, someone who had left the battlefield without letting it control the rest of his life. Right from the very first pages of the script, Tom felt an indescribable closeness. It was not because Magnum was like him, but because of the deep silence within the character, something that only those who had once worn the uniform could truly understand. That role did not just pull him back from the edge of being forgotten. It also reshaped the image of the hero on American television. Not the invincible or perfect type, but a real human being who knew how to use a smile to hide his wounds, who knew fatigue yet still remained determined to do what was right, even when the price he had to pay was not small at all. Also during that same period, another unexpected phone call came from Steven Spielberg. Tom Selleck was the very first choice for the role of Indiana Jones in Raiders of the Lost Ark, an opportunity that many actors would have been willing to trade anything to get. Yet when the script reached his hands, he faced the unavoidable truth. He had just signed an exclusive contract with CBS for Magnum P.I. In front of him were 2 clear paths. One side was the cinematic dream that could put his name into Hollywood history. The other side was the signed commitment, quiet, not glamorous, yet full of obligations. In the end, Tom chose to turn down Indiana Jones. Many people called it the biggest mistake of his career. Ironically, not long afterward, a strike by the Actors Guild caused the Magnum filming schedule to be postponed for nearly 6 months, a period long enough for him to have taken part in both projects. But Tom still did not change his decision. "I didn't want to look my parents straight in the eye and lie to them," he once shared. "If I had signed my name, then I had to keep my word. Fame could come and go." But for Tom, a promise was something that nothing could replace. After that, Magnum P.I. officially went on air. At first, no one thought the show would become a phenomenon. Yet after only 1 season, it had entered the top 20 most-watched programs in America. By the 3rd season, it had climbed to 4th place nationwide, a rare achievement, especially when the main character was a Vietnam War veteran. At a time when Hollywood usually portrayed returning soldiers as broken or out of control, Thomas Magnum appeared as an exception. He had survived the war while still keeping his kindness, his sense of humor, and his responsibility for his own choices. For the first time, America saw a veteran who was not a wound, but a complete human being. Magnum P.I. ran for 8 seasons, from 1980 to 1988. The finale attracted more than 50 million viewers. But what made the show endure was not the numbers. It was the sense of safety that Magnum brought. A hero who did not show off, but simply stood quietly in the right place when it was needed. Its influence was so great that even Frank Sinatra could not resist it. He personally called to ask for a guest role with one simple condition: "Just let me get to punch someone on screen." It was not for fame, but because Magnum P.I. had by then become a cultural icon that everyone wanted to touch at least once. After Magnum, Tom did not choose to rest on the peak of glory. He left the comfort zone and tried his hand at film through roles such as the lost baseball player in Japan in Mr. Baseball, or the Western sharpshooter in Quigley Down Under. The characters were not loud, but they all carried the strong Tom Selleck quality, calm, principled, and full of humanity. He did not chase after trends. He simply continued to move forward, slowly but steadily, exactly the way he had chosen right from the beginning. But right at the moment when America began to mention his name more often, Tom's private life quietly turned in another direction. When his first marriage gradually came to an end, the woman was Jacqueline Ray, a model and actress whom Tom married in 1971, when his career was still far from the spotlight. When the two of them came together, Jacqueline already had a young son named Kevin, and almost by instinct, Tom stepped into the role of father. He adopted Kevin, gave the boy his last name, and from then on became the only man the child called Dad. For Tom, family had never been something that could be done halfway. Those years passed peacefully. A small home, ordinary daily routines, and a rare feeling of stability amid a life that was full of ups and downs. Only much later, when he was already standing in the bright lights, did Tom realize that it was precisely that peace which could slip away most easily. When the marriage broke up, he left the shared life in silence. But the role of father never changed. Kevin grew up, found his path in music, and later became the drummer for the rock band Tonic. Tom did not stand beside his son under the flashbulbs. He chose a position blended in with the crowd, quietly watching, as if that was truly where he belonged. There were performances where he sat in the distant rows and no one recognized him. And perhaps it was that very anonymity that gave him a greater sense of peace than any introduction ever could. When Kevin stumbled during his teenage years, the press began to get curious. Questions were sent. Invitations appeared. Tom refused all of them. He once said that if he stepped forward to explain, it would mean allowing outsiders to interfere in his son's life. For him, love sometimes did not lie in speaking out, but in keeping a protective boundary around the people he cared about. In 1984, in a rare conversation with People magazine, Tom shared for the first time about the broken marriage. His voice was slow and solemn, as if he was facing himself more than answering the interview. "When you get married," he said, "you are not only making a promise to the other person. You are promising yourself that you will become a better man." He paused for a moment and then continued, his voice very soft. "Divorce does not mean you have betrayed that promise. Sometimes it is simply another way for you to continue keeping your word." A few years later, when life had calmed down a little, Tom went to London to shoot a commercial. On a free evening with no schedule and no specific purpose, he stepped into a theater to watch the musical Cats. It was simply because he needed a place to sit down for a while. Without knowing it, in that seemingly random moment, Tom Selleck's life was about to open an entirely new page. The woman was Jill Mack. Many years later, Jilly still smiled radiantly when she recounted the story. "I noticed an American man with a mustache sitting right in the row in front. He just stared straight ahead, almost showing no emotion at all. I turned to my friends and asked, 'Who is that strange guy?' After the third performance, Tom invited her to dinner. They talked for a very long time. The topics were not about movies or fame. They were only everyday things, about family, long trips, and the feeling of being lost in a strange city. Jilly had absolutely no idea that the man sitting across from her was the famous American television star, and Tom did not proactively reveal it either. Their feelings blossomed quickly, but they were kept private in a natural way. When Jilly moved to America to live with Tom, they lived like two ordinary people, gradually connecting their separate lives day by day. In 1987, they held a simple wedding beside Lake Tahoe, with only close family and friends present. 1 year later, their daughter Hannah was born. and Tom made a decision that surprised many people. He paused his career for nearly 2 years to stay home and take care of the child. "I didn't want to become a father whom my daughter would have to forgive later," he once shared. The whole family moved to a ranch of more than 60 acres in Ventura. Tom worked in the fields, planted avocado trees, repaired fences, and mowed the grass like an ordinary man who had never been involved with Hollywood. Jill quietly took care of their home. Hannah grew up surrounded by nature and early on fell in love with horse riding. And if the public still caught sight of Tom Selleck, it was not through the camera lens, but rather the image of a father standing tucked behind the wooden fence, watching every galloping circle his daughter made. That was a choice that brought peace, but it also made him accept standing outside the Hollywood machine, the very place that had once honored him as the icon of a glorious era. After the changes in his personal life, Tom quietly returned to the film set, this time with roles that demanded greater depth. 3 Men and a Baby, released in 1987, unexpectedly became the highest-grossing film in America that year. Audiences saw a completely different Tom Selleck, humorous, approachable, and sometimes clumsy, like the man you could meet living right next door. But if there was one role that Tom always mentioned with special respect, it was Quigley Down Under in 1990. In the role of an American sharpshooter who was lost in Australia, he did not play a victorious hero, but a man who carried his principles and quietly faced a world that no longer had room for those values. "I like characters who do not need to shout to prove their strength," Tom once said. And Quigley was exactly that kind of character. In 1992, Mr. Baseball was released, a film that seemed light on the surface but clearly reflected Tom Selleck's own personality. In the following years, he continued to appear in and Out, The Love Letter, and many other films. Some were successful, others were quickly forgotten. But Tom never judged his career by box office numbers. After each role, he only asked himself whether he had given everything he had. Yet it was precisely during this period that he began to touch a fragile boundary that few people had dared to cross before. In and Out, Tom played Peter Malloy, an entertainment reporter who was openly gay. The film had one brief moment, only a few seconds long, a kiss between 2 men. It was not dramatic or showy. It was simply as ordinary as life still happens every single day. But for America in the 1990s, and with the masculine image that Tom Selleck had built over so many years, that was enough to spark a wave of controversy. Just one scene, and the man himself was immediately put under the microscope. The public no longer focused on the character, but began to scrutinize the actor's private life. When asked about it, Tom did not choose to argue. He only said that the one thing he cared about was whether the audience believed in the character or not, rather than whether the actor had to fit any preconceived stereotypes. It was not a shocking statement, but the familiar calmness of someone who had long ago stopped wanting to explain himself. And at that very moment, it clearly showed one thing. Behind the masculinity that had once been a symbol of America, Tom Selleck had never been afraid to transform into characters who were different from himself, as long as they were portrayed with sincerity. Because for him, acting was never about protecting an image. It was about daring to take on roles that others still hesitated to accept. By 1996, Tom appeared in Friends in the role of Dr. Richard Burke. It was only 6 episodes, yet they were enough to make audiences see him in a completely new light. There was no longer the action hero and no longer the old halo. He was simply a calm, middle-aged man who knew how to listen and knew when to stay silent at the right moment. From the look in his eyes and the smile to the fragile moments, Tom made everyone realize that attraction does not lie in youth, but in the depth of someone who has been through many ups and downs. This role earned him an Emmy nomination, And at the age of 50, Tom Selleck did not prove that he was still in his prime. He simply showed that sometimes men become most attractive when they no longer try so hard to attract attention. At the same time, he ventured to revive the Western film genre, a genre that had once dominated Hollywood but was gradually fading away. Last Stand at Sabre River, Crossfire Trail, Monty Walsh did not create a box office storm, but they were highly appreciated by older audiences. These were the people who still believed in the old American spirit, in honor, in promises, in responsibility, and in timely silence. In 2007, Tom appeared in Las Vegas as A.J. Cooper, replacing James Caan. Once again, he affirmed that his appeal did not come from age, but from presence, something that could not be learned, could not be imitated, and could only be accumulated through the passing years. In 2010, Tom Selleck stepped into a new chapter of his career, Blue Bloods. In the role of Frank Reagan, New York Police Commissioner and the pillar of a multi-generational family in law enforcement, Tom did not play a powerful figure. He played a human being who shouldered responsibility. A father who had to make decisions every single day and understood that any choice would hurt someone. Blue Bloods did not chase after fast-paced action. It was slow, calm, and sometimes almost silent. But it was precisely that silence that made the series last for so long. For more than 14 seasons and hundreds of episodes, Blue Bloods always remained in the top most-watched programs in America. Not because of drama, but because of the sense of reliability it brought. The role of Frank Reagan did not bring Tom major awards, but it brought him something far more precious: respect. He was no longer the hero of speed and bright lights. He had become the quiet father who shouldered both the city and the family with integrity and compassion. Unlike many veteran stars who simply showed up on set and then left, Tom chose to stay behind the scenes. He participated in production, gave creative advice, and resolutely protected the spirit of the show. When CBS suggested cutting the family dinner scene because it lacked drama, Tom objected strongly. "It is not just a scene," he said. "It is the reason the show exists." In an era when television was dominated by algorithms and short-term trends, Tom Selleck chose the harder path. And perhaps that was the biggest role of his life. Not in front of the camera, but in the way he preserved the art of storytelling right up to the present day. And just when Tom Selleck thought he had reached a deep enough silence to rest, life quietly turned once more, in a way that no one was prepared for. In 2015, when California entered one of the most severe droughts in history, water became a luxury even more precious than money. Lawns were dry and cracked, residential areas were tightly restricted on watering, and the whole state lived in prolonged tension. In that context, Tom Selleck's name suddenly appeared in the news because of an accusation that left many people stunned. The man who had been seen as a symbol of integrity was accused of hiring water trucks from a water supply area more than 30 kilometers away from his ranch in order to irrigate the avocado garden of more than 60 acres in Ventura. According to the records, this transportation was said to have lasted nearly 2 years, with an estimated total volume of water exceeding 1 million gallons. That was not an easy number to hear, and it was even less something the public was willing to overlook, especially when it was linked to a face that had represented the line between right and wrong for many decades on American television. The local water agency filed a lawsuit, accusing him of illegally using public water sources. The matter was later settled out of court. Tom agreed to pay more than $20,000 for the cost of the investigation, but he did not admit to any wrongdoing. Legally, he was not convicted. But in terms of image, something had cracked. For someone who had been viewed as the moral compass of American television, it was a scratch that could not simply be ignored. Before public opinion could settle down, Tom faced yet another wave of criticism, This time not from the ranch, but from personal connections that had lasted for many years. He had once belonged to the group of most recognizable faces associated with the National Rifle Association, NRA, an organization that had great power but also created deep divisions in American society. With the image of a gun-holding hero on screen, that relationship had previously been considered natural. But when a series of school shooting incidents occurred one after another, leaving casualty numbers that could not be forgiven, the public began to look at it differently. The wave of criticism spread widely. Many artists spoke out publicly. A portion of the audience turned away. And Tom Selleck, a person who had never proactively sought the role of activist, suddenly became the center of a debate he had never wanted to enter. Although Tom repeatedly affirmed that he did not support violence, and that his belief came from citizen rights, rather than the worship of guns. In an era when social emotions ran high, those calm explanations no longer seemed convincing enough. For some people, that connection gradually became a stain, no matter who the real man actually was. In 2018, Tom Selleck quietly withdrew from the NRA board of directors. Without any long explanation, he chose to step back in silence, true to the person he had always been. In fact, that was not the first time he had chosen silence. Throughout his career, Tom Selleck had almost never publicly expressed political opinions. Although believed to lean moderately conservative, he rarely spoke, something quite rare in Hollywood, where silence itself was sometimes viewed as taking a stance. But that silence was not about avoidance. In a 1999 interview on The Rosie O'Donnell Show, when he was questioned harshly about the NRA and gun ownership rights, Tom still kept a calm tone, without arguing or defending himself. He answered slowly and carefully, choosing each word as if the important thing was not to win a debate, but to avoid hurting the person sitting across from him. It was not because he lacked opinions, but because he believed that some conversations did not need a winner. Today, at the age of 81, when the stage lights have gradually moved far away from his life, Tom Selleck chooses a rhythm of living that is exactly like the man he has been for so many years: simple, disciplined, and quiet. He lives on a ranch in Ventura County, where mornings begin with mowing the grass, repairing roads, taking care of fruit trees, and end when the sun sets behind the old avocado rows. Tom rarely appears in public. He once joked that he did not like the gym and that he would rather sweat under the sun than stand looking at himself in the mirror. But behind that half-joking remark was an entire life maintained by principles, regular habits, manual labor, and self-discipline, as if he had never left the training camp from years ago. Instead of pursuing luxury, Tom found joy in classic cars, Ferraris, Mustangs, and even military vehicles from World War II. He did not collect them to show off, nor to display them behind glass. Each machine was maintained and operated regularly, as a way for him to preserve memories and to show respect for history, as well as for the very flow of time that had passed through his own life. In 2024, Tom released his memoir, You Never Know. It was not to boast about achievements or to polish his image. The book was like a late letter sent back to the past. He wrote about his anxious youth, the failed films, the opportunities that slipped away, the decision to turn down the Indiana Jones role, and the years of fame that could easily lead a person astray. For the first time, Tom admitted to the loneliness, something that had still quietly existed behind the calmness that the public had grown used to seeing for many decades. He once called himself a builder, someone who only focused on doing the job right in front of him well, then quietly moved on to the next task. For Tom, the acting profession had never been a place to show off himself or to bargain for fame. Just go to work and receive a paycheck. That is not how I live, he once wrote. Off camera, Tom still quietly did things that few people knew about. supporting veterans, helping fire departments, reaching out to colleagues who were facing difficulties, without needing to have his name mentioned, and without needing any thanks. Tom Selleck had never tried to keep up with the times. He chose to walk slowly, persistently, and true to himself until the very end of the road. In a world that is constantly changing, he did not seek attention and did not need to show off in order to be seen. What was important to Tom had never been standing in front of the crowd, but never losing the values that had followed him throughout his entire life. And if there was one thing people would still remember about him, perhaps it was not the mustache or the red Ferrari, but a career that had been built on steadfastness, on the belief that doing the right thing, even in silence, would always leave a trace, a legacy that did not need to shout loudly. It only needed to be real enough, to be truly heard. When looking back on the life of Tom Selleck, people finally understand that he was not the type of legend built by scandals or noisy comeback moments. He existed like a persistent straight line, sometimes veering off course, sometimes scratched, but always returning to discipline, to promises, and to quiet kindness. You may not believe why people mention him today, but perhaps the most memorable thing is still the way he chose to live, quietly yet honorably, like a man who no longer needed to prove anything at all. Thank you for following along to this point. If you have ever loved Tom Selleck, please leave a comment, hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell to join me in continuing to explore the untold stories of American legends.